Before I start reading chapter 2 today, I'd like to point out that in the back of the book there is a list of characters and places, and this includes a pronunciation guide. In chapter 1, I really struggled with some of the pronunciation, and I'll do my best, but between the two readings, I stopped and read through all of these characters and places out loud. So I will make my best effort at pronouncing these names properly in this next chapter, but I would suggest that each of you stop before you continue reading or listening. In this case, hit pause and flip to this pronunciation guide, the list of characters and places, and practice. So just read straight through the list. You can stop and read the description of the character as well, or you could just read through the pronunciation so that you're familiar with it when you encounter it. Another helpful point about that is that you'll encounter many characters over the course of the story, and I think that's one of the things that makes understanding mythology challenging when you are new to it. So having this reference in the back to help you keep characters straight may serve you well. So little heads up on that. Okay, chapter 2, Helen. The house of Menelaus, most powerful of the kings of Greece, lay on the edge of the Spartan plain. Here the evening meal was being prepared for the men of the great household, who were gathering in the courtyard as they returned from vineyard or field. The lowing of cattle filled the air, for milking was over, and the great herds of the king were being penned for the night. A servant came quickly into the dim hall, in which the torches were just being kindled. "There's a chariot in the gateway, King Menelaus," he announced. "A young man declares himself to be Paris, Prince of Troy and Asia, traveling to see the world." "Bring him in," answered the king. "While the women prepare a bath and lay out fresh garments, you may send word to the queen that a stranger will feast with us, for she loves to hear talk of far lands." Menelaus rose from his chair by the hearth, but as the guest came into the torchlight, the king hesitated for a moment in amazement at the sight of the young man's exceeding beauty. Paris seemed all brown and golden. His bright helmet was pushed back, and yellow hair clustered from beneath it round a brown face, ruddy with health. A tawny leopard skin hung over his shoulders. His belt and sandals were of gold. His short tunic was pure white, showing arms and legs lightly tanned. "When he stands beside Helen, my wife," thought Menelaus, "they will make the most beautiful couple that has ever been seen upon the earth." When Paris emerged from his bath, his yellow hair combed and shining, men set a chair for him beside Menelaus and drew up a small table. A girl brought a pitcher of water, which she poured into a silver basin for the washing of hands. Then the carver laid platters of meat before them, while an old servant added wheaten bread, cheese, figs, and other such foods from the storehouse. Another carried in the golden cups and a bowl of wine mixed with water. As the king ate with his guest, he was charmed by the young man's grace and the low tones of his musical voice. "You must sing for us after the feast," said he. "If your skill with the lyre matches your voice, we shall think ourselves lucky indeed. Our minstrel is old, so that the queen grows weary of his songs and keeps to her room. Without her, gloom descends on my hall." "I have some skill in music," admitted the young man. "Indeed, Hector, my brother, declares that I spend too much time with my lyre and neglect the weapons of war. I'm a fair shot with a bow, but it is true that I was reared in the mountains and never trained with spear or sword." "Each man has a different gift," said the warrior king, with tolerant contempt. "Indeed, that is so," replied Paris earnestly. "Hector's gift is prowess in war. Mine's mere grace and beauty. Yet you should not despise it, since it alone is not born of practice, but comes unsought, direct from the blessed gods. No man can win it to whom it has not been given." "Best of all are the gifts of the gods," said the king mechanically. But his eyes were already on the doorway, where a little bustle of servants marked the arrival of his wife. A pretty girl drew up a chair by the hearth, while another knelt to adjust the soft rug before it. A third wheeled in a silver basket of yarn, across which lay a distaff full of bright blue wool to be spun. Behind all these came the lady, Helen. Menelaus looked to his guest for the gasp of admiration with which strangers were used to greeting the dazzling appearance of the loveliest woman upon the earth. Paris's lips opened and moved slightly, but no sound came. Menelaus, marveling at the charm of his sudden smile, missed the little start given by Helen at the sight of so beautiful a young man. Nor could he hear the voice of Aphrodite, though it sounded very clearly in Paris's ears. "I promised you the fairest woman in all the world to wife." Paris took the lyre to sing a lay for Helen, and her husband was glad that this evening she lingered in the hall. On the following nights she stayed late again, while Paris wooed her with whispers and glances, with the notes of his voice as he sang for her, and with a secret touch of her hand. Menelaus, pleased by the gay charm of his guest, thought nothing of his admiration for Helen. All men hung upon the sight of her, yet she, although she loved her husband but little, showed no favor to others. Her nature, the king imagined, was cold. At last, however, on a moonless night, Helen rose silently from her husband's side to steal down the narrow steps and through the great hall where the sleepers stirred uneasily. In the courtyard, Paris was wheeling out his light chariot, while his servant led the horses through the gateway where the noise of their harness might not be heard. Soon Paris leaped into the chariot and put one arm around Helen as she clung to the rail. The servant sprang aside from the horses' heads. In the dark hall, the noise of the wheels was like distant thunder rolling farther and farther away into the hills. Down on the coast in the early morning, the great ship in which Priam had sent out his favorite son hurriedly hoisted her sails. Her long oars clawed the gray water, even as in his palace in Sparta, Menelaus awoke, alone. The most beautiful woman in the world had left her husband. The guest who was treated with honor had robbed his friend. End of chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Madness of Odysseus. The father of Helen had been a far-sighted man. When he saw that his daughter was wooed by every prince in Greece, he determined to make her chosen husband the greatest of them all. He therefore made every suitor take an oath to count Helen's husband as his overlord for the future. It so happened that Menelaus, on whom the king's choice finally fell, was not enterprising, and had hitherto made no demand on the services of the kings of Greece. When, however, envoys were sent to fetch back Helen, the Trojans, commercial rivals of Greece, supported Paris. They refused to give up Helen or even pay a fine. Thereupon, Menelaus, goaded on by his more ambitious brother Agamemnon, sent all the kings a message to meet with him at Aulis, where a great fleet was being fitted out to punish Troy. Great dismay fell on the kings of Greece when this news was brought to them. It was years since the wooing of Helen. Those who did not win her hand had put out of their minds and married others. Now they were husbands and fathers busy with cares of their kingdoms. Though they were jealous of the power of Troy, they felt that this quarrel was not theirs and that the town was very far away. Kingdoms would have to be left to the management of a struggling wife or an aged father or a half-grown son. The seas were wide and dangerous. Success was uncertain. Although the kings of Greece would not publicly break their oaths, yet it was clear they did not want to come. The more the kings wavered, the more determinedly Agamemnon pushed them on. This was his chance to launch the greatest of fleets that the world had ever seen, and to sack the greatest of cities. His messengers were persuasive men, carefully chosen, and Palamedes, the cleverest of them all, was sent to Ithaca, where King Odysseus dwelt. Odysseus was the wisest man in Greece and the most winning talker. He was broad and burly in appearance, at first sight less impressive than taller men. Words came to him as easily as snowflakes come in winter, and the notes of his great, deep voice held men spellbound while he played upon their hearts. No man who had heard Odysseus speak could fail to respect him, wherefore Agamemnon had hoped to use him to persuade the other kings. Unfortunately, of all the kings in Greece, Odysseus was the most unwilling to come. His land was farthest from Troy, since Ithaca was a little island off the western coast, while Troy was across the eastern sea. He loved the rocky country and the simple farmers and fishermen of his home. He longed to stay with his dear wife, Penelope, who had just borne him a son. In the face of these things, his oath seemed quite unreasonable. Yet, the wise king lacked a good excuse to break it. Therefore, about 2 days before the arrival of Palamedes, Odysseus suddenly went mad. It was very convincingly done. In spite of their natural suspicions, even the elders were taken in. Early one morning, Odysseus was found on the shore, driving 2 oxen harnessed to a plow and turning the dry sand over in furrows. Round his neck was a great bag of salt that he was sowing as he went, muttering wildly to himself. "Must get on with the plowing," he was saying. "Must be done by dark." People tried to reason with him, but it was no use. His wild eyes looked right through them, and he gave no sign of having heard. A man tried to stop the oxen, but Odysseus drove right on and would have plowed him under if he had not jumped aside. Penelope came down to plead with him, her young son in her arms, but though she implored him to listen and the baby cooed to him, he took no notice. Penelope walked up and down beside him, talking and trying to make him listen all day long. When night came, attendants led her home, but Odysseus merely loosed the oxen and lay down the furrows. At dawn he was up again, hair and beard matted with sand, plowing along the seashore as before. This was how Palamedes found him. Distracted men lined the beach, and his wife walked beside him carrying the child. The man himself, wild-eyed and dirty, was goading the oxen on and muttering constantly, "Must be done by dark." Palamedes did not believe in Odysseus's madness. "This is all too well timed," he declared with scorn, hoping to arouse the king into betraying anger. Odysseus's face was burned bright red by the sun, so that there was no chance of his changing color, and Palamedes soon found himself as helpless as Penelope had been. He ran up and down by the plowshare in the hot sun, breathlessly repeating the message of Agamemnon. He tried to stop the oxen, but was knocked down and nearly trampled. He appealed to the watching elders, and they simply wrung their hands. He was hot and dirty and bruised where he had fallen beneath the oxen. He was making himself ridiculous, and he knew it. The group of spectators, concerned as they were, began to find him so. Presently, some of them laughed. Palamedes lost his temper. With a bound, he jumped on Penelope, snatched her child, and flung it down on the sand, straight under the oxen's feet. The crafty king, who had noticed nothing for 2 days, suddenly and completely gave himself away. He wrenched the plow around with all his strength and sprang to the heads of the plunging oxen. He snatched his child away from the trampling feet. Then he turned on Palamedes and knocked him down. It was no use pretending to be mad anymore. Odysseus had come to his senses and listened to the messenger with as much dignity as he could assume. I read that funnily. Let me try again. Odysseus had to come to his senses and listen to the messenger with as much dignity as he could assume. It was he that was ridiculous now. "I would not be Palamedes," whispered one old man to another as he saw his king's gray eyes rest on Agamemnon's messenger. "No wise man cares to be made to look like a fool, and though Odysseus is a good friend, he's a fearful enemy." In later years, news came to Ithaca that Palamedes had been put to death by the Greeks for having dealings with the Trojans. The old men put their heads together, and their beards wagged busily. "Did we not say our king is a fearful enemy?" they whispered. A rumor then went around that a plot of Odysseus had destroyed an innocent man. Be that as it may, Odysseus kept his oath to Menelaus and manned his ships. He kissed Penelope goodbye and saw her holding the little boy as she waved to him from the shore. It was 20 years before he had sight of wife or child again. That is the end of chapter 3.